Blessed are the eyes that see what you see. For I tell you, many kings and prophets have desired to see what you see, and have not seen it. To hear what you hear, and have not heard it. I thank you, Father, for hiding these things from the learned and the wise, and revealing them to the innocent and the simple.
Columns of ash spewed as high as 4,100 meters into the sky, setting the highest record so far this year. And the Japan Meteorological Agency set the alert level at 3 out of 5, and that means limitations were placed on mountain trips. This is the 43rd eruption the volcano has experienced this year. 47 volcanoes are monitored by the agency all year round, and the eruption frequency for Sakurajima volcano has been relatively low this year.
Nearly 30 airstrikes have hit rebel-held areas of Syria's northern city of Aleppo, killing at least 5 people. A monitor group said the airstrikes were believed to have been carried out by Syrian government warplanes. The group puts the total number of people killed by the warring sides to nearly 250 after 9 straight days of bombardment. However, the Syrian army announced what it called a temporary regime of calm late on Friday. It appeared to have taken hold in the northwestern coastal province Latakia and outskirts of the capital Damascus. Russia says it will not ask the Syrian government to halt air raids on Aleppo, saying the strikes are helping to combat jihadist groups. The Russian Defense Ministry has refuted Pentagon claims that a Russian aircraft had intercepted a U.S. military plane approaching its border over the Baltic Sea, saying its jets conducted their mission based on international regulations. On Friday, the Pentagon said a U.S. Air Force reconnaissance plane was flying in international airspace, and a Russian fighter jet had intercepted it in what it called an unsafe and unprofessional way. Russia refuted that all flights of its aircraft were carried out in accordance with international regulations on the use of airspace. It said the U.S. plane was trying to sneak up to the Russian border with its transponder turned off all the time, so the Russian side had to lift its aircraft to identify the type of U.S. plane. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for 2 car bomb attacks that killed at least 32 people and wounded 75 others in the southern city of Samawa on Sunday. Police say the first blast was near the provincial council building, while the second was at a bus station 60 meters away. ISIL attacks in the predominantly Shia South are relatively rare, as it holds positions mostly in Sunni areas in the country's north and west. Well, a peaceful May Day march in the U.S. city of Seattle turned violent when police tried to disband the large crowd. Protesters refused police orders and started throwing rocks and bricks at security personnel. 5 officers were injured. Police arrested 9 people involved in the attacks. Demonstrators held May Day protests across the U.S. on Sunday to call for better wages for workers and an end to deportations.
Thousands of people have taken to the streets to celebrate May Day and to protest against racism and right-wing extremism in Berlin. Scuffles between protesters and police broke out on Sunday. Clashes erupted when the protesters started to set off smoke flares, and riot police made several arrests. The march, which started off peacefully, took place in the traditionally left-wing district of Kreuzberg.
Protesters clashed with police inside Baghdad's heavily fortified Green Zone as demonstrators demanded an overhaul of what they call a broken government that has failed to provide basic services like water and electricity. This Green Zone is not the property of any member of the parliament. It's the property of the Iraqi people, said Habib al-Battat. And he and hundreds of others made themselves at home in this international government compound, rarely seen by Iraqi civilians. Yesterday, thousands toppled the Green Zone's blast wall and stormed parliament. Cell phone video shows lawmakers escaping in cars. The crowd, backed by popular Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, demanded Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi overhaul his cabinet, which they say is part of a corrupt political system put in place by the U.S. after the invasion in 2003. This weekend's security breach came less than 48 hours after Vice President Joe Biden visited the Iraqi capital in a show of support for al-Abadi, who the U.S. regards as a stable partner in the war on ISIS. But there is concern ISIS is feeding off this political instability. This afternoon, the group carried out twin car bombings that rocked the southern Iraqi city of Samawa. More than 30 people were killed. It's the latest in a recent wave of attacks.
Now, a Turkish parliamentary committee meeting has erupted in chaos once again, following last Thursday's, which gave rise to a fist fight. And the ongoing row is over a contentious ruling party proposal to strip legislators of their immunity from prosecution. Legislators hurled bottled water at each other across the meeting room, forcing the committee head to halt proceedings. And the committee is discussing a proposed constitutional amendment that could pave the way for the trial of several pro-Kurdish legislators on terror-related charges. The proposal was put together after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan accused the party of being an arm of the outlawed Kurdish rebels. And the move comes amid a surge of violence in Turkey's southeast after a fragile peace process with the rebels collapsed.
Zika virus may spread further in the United States than first thought. The virus, which causes crippling birth defects, was known to be carried by a mosquito that is mostly limited to the south, but now Zika has been discovered in a second species that ranges as far north as Maine and Minnesota. It's important to remember there have been no cases of mosquito-borne Zika in the U.S., but health officials believe that time is coming.
A suicide car bomb attack in Iraq's capital has killed 18 Shiite pilgrims and wounded dozens more. The attack occurred around noon in Saidia district in the south of Baghdad. Thousands of Shiite pilgrims were on their way to a shrine when the attack occurred. No group has claimed responsibility for the bombing. ISIL militants carried out a similar attack last Saturday, killing 23 people outside Baghdad. Islamist militants in the southern Philippines have released a video purportedly showing 3 hostages pleading for help. A masked militant has vowed to behead them if the group's demands are not met. The group released 10 Indonesian hostages on Sunday, ending a month-long ordeal during which a kidnapped Canadian was beheaded after a ransom deadline had passed. Abu Sayyaf, a brutal militia known for amassing tens of millions of dollars from the ransom business, is now holding 13 other people. Foreign ministers of the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia are due to meet in Jakarta this week to discuss ways to work together to secure key shipping routes in the waters between the 3 countries.
Now let's turn to Syria. The government forces and the rebels have continued their intense fighting in the northern city of Aleppo. And the British-based monitoring group, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, said rebel rockets killed and injured dozens of people in the hospital, the second one targeted in less than a week. It also said at least 1 man died in the land-based missile attack by forces loyal to the government. Meanwhile, a temporary local truce has expired in the capital Damascus. Aleppo, which was excluded from last week's ceasefire deal, has been the scene of the worst surge in fighting in recent weeks, wrecking the UN-brokered cessation of hostilities. Well, the UN Security Council has adopted a resolution to try to prevent attacks on medical and humanitarian personnel in violent conflict. The resolution comes after reports of targeted attacks on hospitals in Syria. It urged all parties in conflict to avoid acts of violence against medical personnel, their means of transport, as well as hospitals and other medical facilities. And according to a human rights NGO, it has documented more than 360 attacks on some 250 medical facilities since the beginning of the Syrian conflict. More than 730 medical personnel have been killed. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has called the intentional and direct attacks on hospitals as war crimes.
South Korea's military has warned of another possible nuclear test and missile launch from the DPRK. Seoul's defense ministry said the DPRK could conduct what it calls strategic provocations ahead of the ruling Workers' Party Congress, and that starts on Friday. The ministry said a likely location would be the main Pyongyang nuclear test site. It noted that DPRK leader Kim Jong-un may seek to laud his achievements with another nuclear test as South Korea undervalues its 4th.
More than 100 refugees have died in 4 shipwrecks between Libya and Italy. According to the International Organization for Migration, the Libya-Italy route has become the preferred crossing for refugees attempting to go to Europe. This can be attributed to the closing of land routes in the Balkans and the recent EU deal to send refugees from Greece back to Turkey. Since January of this year, 1,357 refugees have died at sea, mostly along the central Mediterranean route. Europe has been grappling with its biggest influx of refugees since World War II, as people flee conflict-ridden zones in Africa and the Middle East, especially Syria.
Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu says the troops are necessary to counter a planned NATO buildup inside Europe's Baltic states. Shoigu gave no specifics about the number of additional troops to be deployed, but said the 2 new divisions will be operational before the end of the year. On Monday, U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter said the NATO was considering a continuous rotation of up to 4,000 troops in the Baltic states and possibly Poland to secure the region. Yemen's warring parties have resumed face-to-face peace talks after the government delegation walked out of negotiations 3 days ago. Yemen's war has killed more than 6,400 people and displaced 2.8 million since March last year. The negotiations, which began on April 21st, ended abruptly on Sunday after the government delegation walked out to protest the forced surrender of a loyalist base. Pro-government fighters in the Yemeni city of Taiz say they are defending residential areas from Houthi rebels who have the UN-led ceasefire.